program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9.
Good evening, everybody. Appreciate everybody coming down here. As you all have noticed, of course, we're in a different situation, and things are quite different here, so please be patient as we get the bugs worked out, get us all figured out. The Plan Commission attempts to conduct its public hearings in a relatively informal manner within the constraints that we must deal with all the issues before us in an orderly and business-like fashion. We give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, and then others, either for or against, are each permitted to speak once. We do request that everybody restrict their comments to the issues before us, avoiding unnecessary repetition, and be prudent with the use of your time and ours. We want to be sure that we have adequate time to deal with all items in equal amount of time. Let's see, please turn off phones, iPads, etc., or turn them to silent. Please, if you're going to speak tonight, we got yellow sheets in the back of the room to fill out. And before you speak, please give us your name and address. Ryan, where do you want the yellow slips? Just drop them off on that door. Okay, thanks. So yeah, please leave them on the podium when you're done speaking. And I guess we're on to the first item. Here we go. So item number one for approval is a conditional use permit. Immaculate Heart Media, conditional use for ground-mounted satellite dish.
Good evening. This item was postponed by the Plan Commission at the July 16th meeting, which was 3 weeks ago. We did receive a revised site plan from the applicant. The proposed satellite dish has been moved to be closer to the existing cell tower, about 51 feet instead of the original 70 feet. In addition, the applicant is proposing some evergreen plantings to the south along the south property line. Also, it appears now the structure will be about 149 feet from all property lines surrounding the site. I do have some photographs here showing the new proposal. Well, hopefully I do this right. There we go. It's a little hard to see, but the new satellite dish would go here about 51 feet from the existing cell tower. Here is an aerial photograph showing the site. The applicant is proposing some screening to the south here now from the residential. In your packet too is the original proposal, which is showing satellite dishes here. It's about 70 feet away. And then also in your packet is an example of the ground-mounted satellite dish. It's a 12-foot satellite dish. That proposal has not changed. The zoning of the property, again, is C2, community commercial. The satellite dish would be receiver only for radio programming. Again, in your packet is the original staff report from the meeting on July 16th. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I do know the applicant is here again if you have more questions, concerns, and go that route.
Thank you, Ryan. And I forgot to mention, our system up here allows us to turn mics on and off, but it doesn't allow us to see who would like to speak, so I guess we'll have to raise hands here tonight. If anybody has any questions for Ryan. Terry.
I'm just curious about the screening. Can you be more specific as far as the vegetative screening? Height or types of vegetation?
Yes, Mr. Weld. They are proposing on the recommendation conifer trees ranging from 6 to 8 feet in height. Tree spacing looks to be 6 to 10 feet depending on the species. The applicant may know exactly what species they're proposing to plant.
Just a follow-up. What is the height of the satellite dish?
My understanding is a 12-foot diameter dish. I don't know the exact overall height of that dish. Now, these I would reference too that the screening will be at the property line. There is a fenced-in area that's a triangle area. These will be on the southern property line, so it'll be quite a ways away from the satellite dish.
I see. All right, thank you.
Any additional questions for Ryan? Okay, I don't see any. Is the applicant here? You guys like to come up? Thanks. Anything you'd like to add? Ryan's presentation?
Not really. I don't have what type of vegetation it is, but I know that we're open to it. We're open to suggestion for it. As far as height of it, you're looking at about 13 feet, 14 feet total, maybe a little bit higher than a basketball hoop would be off the ground to the top of the backboard is about how high it'll be. The width of it is about 12 feet around, or 12 feet in diameter, so not overly height as far as compared to a tower next to it, but far enough away that it shouldn't really pose any type of visual obstruction at all.
Great. Any questions for the applicant? Not seeing any. Thanks.
Anytime.
This is a public hearing, so if there's anybody that would like to come up to discuss the item, please do. And start with the name and address. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Stotts, 2506 Colonial Drive, and also a partner with Stotts Real Estate Partnership, and we owned all the property around the tower. And truthfully, I thought they were going to hopefully get that a little bit closer to the tower, just kind of get a little farther away from the property lines to help it make it, nice for us. We're trying to sell lots, trying to do nice homes in there to help out the city of Eau Claire and all that good stuff. And then also, I thought they were going to have a screening closer to the, instead of, they got the south side, but they don't have nothing on the east side, west side, or north side. So I'm just curious. I thought it was going to be a little bit closer to the satellite dish, and I guess I don't know what they can do and can't do, but that's all my concerns are,
Okay. Any questions? I don't see any. Thanks. Anybody else that'd like to come up to discuss? I'm not seeing any. I guess we'd be looking for a motion.
I'll move approval with recommendations.
Second.
All right. We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Terry, hang on a second here.
Just a question again in regards to his concerns about the screening on the other sides of the, is that something we need to look into? Do we feel like we've screened this in as best we can, or is there a reason we haven't screened around the other sides of the?
Let's see, Ryan.
That's a good question. Plan Commission can require screening on all sides. That's your direction.
Could you repeat that?
At this time, there's only a few trees out there. With the satellite tower that was put up, Plan Commission years ago must not require any screening, but it's up to the Plan Commission to require screening on all sides if they propose to.
It is on.
Is that not on?
Just remember its directions. You want to try again just to go test?
Did you hear that all?
I think so.
Okay.
I think we had one comment. I think we had a comment. Yeah. Would you like to come up? Yeah.
Thank you. Disa Wallstrand, 3784 Hester Street. That changes things a little bit, which is why I asked to come up. I'm going to sound like the really picky neighbor, but if I could show an image. This is the view from the back of my lot. I don't know how to switch it. First, let's see, north. First, this is an old satellite image, so my home is built on this lot here. And so there are, and presumably there will be future homes along there. So it does not recognize that long-term development. And then that's the view I have today out right off of my patio in the backyard. So I actually would prefer not to have screening. Where they've put the screening is at their property line, which would be right here along where you see the prairie plantings, instead of along the fence, which is their prerogative, it's their property. But for myself, I see sunsets and open space and birds, and there's some raptors nesting up there lately, so I'd rather not have the trees. So I appreciate the consideration, but for my part, I'm one neighbor on one side, but trees right along that would close in my space rather than leave it open. So that's I don't think that'd be a great investment to make this neighbor happy anyway. Any questions for me?
And the proposed plantings wouldn't be on your property?
Right, that's why I didn't come up initially, is what's shown today wouldn't do that. But to Jeff's point, he owns the other lots that aren't developed along there, and he may have a different opinion than I do.
Okay. Any questions for the speaker? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So you're okay with this new plan?
As it's proposed. Like Jeff, I would have loved to have seen the screening around the dish. That's my ideal. But I recognize that the applicant is not the property owner. The property owner has some buried lines under there, I think. There's an awful lot of growth out there to say that growth interferes with signal lines, but I recognize that new plantings probably would influence that. So yes, for my one lot, I'm happy with the proposal, the improvement in setting it back. So.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Terry?
Are you the only existing property owner with a residence on that street?
True. Right now, these other three lots, the other three lots to my north are for sale, but not developed yet. So I am the only one on the east side right now.
Okay, and the lots north of you with the satellite dish being south of the tower, that probably wouldn't be as invasive for them.
So to describe it, the angle they come off of the tower is really southeast. It comes right sort of towards my north property line, a little bit onto my property. So my next neighbor would see it very clearly out their backyard, but my future neighbor.
Okay. Now, when you bought your lot and built your home, was the tower a detriment to you?
No, the original tower wasn't, but I think I mentioned last time I was here, and I think it was 2006 when the previous conditional use permit was approved, and I really liked what I heard at that time, which was we're reducing it to one building, one tower, everything else goes away. So I understood that to be the current conditional use permit when I bought the land. But no, I mean, there's adding stuff on the ground is a detriment to me. I mean, I'm not in favor of it, but the tower itself is a good neighbor. It's open, I get to see the sunsets every night. I like that.
Right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think I mentioned last time the other thing I have to give the landowner, so not the applicant, they stopped mowing behind me at my request to keep the prairie plantings there for the pollinators. That was another good neighbor move by that landowner.
Okay. Any other questions? Thanks for coming up.
Thank you.
So we do have a motion and a second. If you'd like to amend that at all, if not, we need additional discussion items. Discussion? Okay, I guess we got a motion and a second, so we'd be, I guess let's call a question. All those in favor, how are we going to do this? Want to raise hands or just, all those in favor raise your hands? Aye? Any opposed? One opposed? Oh, I thought, yeah, we were in discussion, sorry. Yep. Sure. Is your mic, I think your mic is active, Terry. Wrong, Terry? Oh, no, I think it was, the other one was.
We were in discussion.
We were, yeah.
I apologize.
Okay. Let's recall the question again. We have, okay, I guess we're approved. Did you vote yea or nay?
I voted yea.
Okay. All right, thank you, all right. We're Thanks, here. You take, make sure that the mic's got to be right in front of you. All right. Okay. So, all right, we're approved there. Now, item number 2 for approval, master sign plan for the Atrium office building on Claremont Avenue. Mr. Petrie.
Good evening again. Sign Art Company Incorporated is requesting a master sign plan for the Atrium building located at 1101 West Claremont Avenue. This office building is a multi-tenant building with 3 common entrances, one on the north end of the building, one on the west wall of the building, and one on the south end of the building. Attached in your packet is the building elevation and the proposed sign plan. This building, with the Plan Commission in 2012, was denied a sign plan because it was not consistent with the existing signage on the building. They never did resubmit the proposal, but now today they're resubmitting for one additional sign. Currently, a multi-tenant ground sign is located on the building, near the building on the north end along Claremont Avenue with 10 panels for the tenants. In addition, there's a wall sign identifying the name of the building, and then there's 2 existing wall signs on the building. The screen's not working anymore. I would show you, but the screen's not working at this time. Most of the signs, there's one sign that's 4x8. It's lit with internally cabinet sign, and then there's also a bell tone sign that's 3x12. The applicant is proposing to install a similar wall sign, 3x12, internally lit cabinet sign, adjacent to the name of the business. Oh, here we go. This is the proposed sign. The Atrium building is the name of the building. The bell tone sign is the existing. This is along Highway 37. Also in your packet is showing the east elevation. Here's the multi-tenant ground sign, and then there's one more sign that's facing Claremont and 37. There is no signs proposed at this time along Claremont, which is the north elevation. And there is no proposed signs along the south elevation, and there is no existing signs on the building. Staff believes that this proposed sign is consistent with the design, style, and the similar sizes to the existing 2 signs and does not create any sign clutter. The 2 existing signs are similar with the cabinet sign internally lit and would match the existing sign. The recommendation by staff would recommend approval of the request with the similar dimensions and size. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, great, thanks. Any questions for Mr. Petrie? I don't see any. Thanks. Is the applicant here? Come on up. Sure. Name and address.
Frank Snyder at 2905 Morningside Drive, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So Ryan summed it up pretty well. We're looking to add pretty much the exact same sign, equidistance from the bell tone sign and the Atrium building letters. So here's a newer piece of artwork. It shows they're spaced evenly, same square footage overall, same size, same build methods, same illumination, and I think that kind of speaks for itself. The tenant, he's one of the largest tenants in the building. He currently does not have a spot on the monument sign, and he takes up roughly a third of the top floor. So he feels a sign would be appropriate for that location, especially because it's that part of the building as well as where he's located. So,
Great.
Any questions for me?
Any questions? I don't see anything. Thanks for coming up.
Thanks.
This is a public hearing. Is there anybody that would like to come up to talk about this? Anybody like to come up? I don't see anybody, so I guess we'd be looking for a motion. Craig?
I'll move approval.
Terry?
I'll second it.
All right, a motion and a second. Any discussion? I don't see any. So no discussion? All right, let's call the question. All those in favor of approval? Aye. Any opposed? All right, I don't see any. Congrats, good luck. All right. Item number 3, for recommendation, we're calling it a certified survey map. Approval, but I think it's more of the land dedication.
Correct.
Land acceptance.
Land acceptance. Go ahead.
That's okay. Okay, so the City of Eau Claire is considering accepting the 66-foot strip of land from Gateway Industrial Park. It's the section designated in the yellow line there. The strip of land is located south of the County Line Road and west of Jeffers Road. The acceptance would be for a public ownership, and at the present, the strip of land serves for a connection for the town of Union. There is no fee being proposed for this land transfer. Are there any questions?
Any questions? I don't see any. Thanks. And the city is the applicant, I believe.
Correct.
It's this public hearing, so, okay. So there's a public hearing, so if there's anybody who'd like to come forward to discuss this item. Anybody like to come forward? I'm not seeing any. So we'd be looking for a motion. Terry?
I'll move acceptance of the property. And the sub, or
The
the
acceptance.
land. Yeah.
Okay, we have a second by James Seymour. All right, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, seeing any, let's call the question. All those in favor of recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Looks like we got it. So that's our public hearing for the night. So we're public hearing. I guess we're on the discussion and direction. Mr. Allen, public notice. Public hearing
I
notice.
can talk loudly, or maybe better with mine.
Ryan's getting cut off here.
All right. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. A few discussion items for you this evening. A few, in fact, really all of them are some follow-ups to some previous discussion items or requests for information and direction. The first being subject of public notices. I know a few new commission members as well as others looking for a refresher. A few changes have occurred, in particular with conditional use permits at the state legislature actually last year. Back in March, which was before my time, as well as a few on the commission, staff provided a memo about conditional use permits specific to, again, the changes at the state legislature. One of those was the change of the public hearing notice from a Class 1 to a Class 2. So what does that mean? And that was the purpose for the cover memo for you this evening, as well as the attachment. The attachment, although it's not, I guess, very pretty in a word, hopefully is informative and useful in terms of laying out the different types of applications that come before the Planning Commission. I say that it's not all-inclusive, but it's ones that are the most prevalent. We also list the process in terms of what the processing time is for that based on state statute, or anything that's even more required through the zoning ordinance or city code. The type of notice, again, primarily Class 2 now is what we're operating under for the most part. And what that means is Class 1 is a 1 newspaper notice, Class 2 is a 2 newspaper notice, really is really what that refers to. And again, that does add at least 1 week worth of time to the public notice period. And then again, that's the next column in the handout is the different notices before that hearing, as well as then the notice for adjacent property owners. A few years ago, City of Eau Claire expanded that requirement to 300 feet for residents, which is more than the standard required by state statute. So in a way, City of Eau Claire is a little bit more generous in terms of how it presents itself through public hearing notices and public notices again for these items. And then we also identify a review period again. The term of art is shot clock, for lack of a better term, meaning that's the requirement for Plan Commission or City Council to review an item before it is deemed essentially automatically approved just because of the time period that it's gone by. Those are typically 60 or 90 days as listed here. So provided some links as well to different both city code as well as state legislature and some of the statutes there. And so with that, I just want to give a little information on that. Another follow-up I will propose is that of public hearings. I know we sometimes list, this is a public hearing, we sometimes list this is a recommendation, this is final approval. For example, a little bit of confusion is just with item number 1, it said it was for recommendation, but it is a final approval here. So sometimes staff we even confuse ourselves at times in terms of what goes where and when. So that'll be hopefully a follow-up to this, is to provide some information in terms of kind of processing. We do have a general, I guess, kind of matrix that speaks to that. That too is not very artistic, so it's a little difficult to kind of walk through, but perhaps for the next Plan Commission agenda we can provide some information on public hearings. So at least understand kind of what public notice requirements are here with this information, but at the next meeting we can provide some information in terms of what is required to have a public hearing, what isn't, what goes through a recommendation to City Council, what's final approval of the Plan Commission. So just as a refresher, again, we try to make that as clear as possible with the agenda and through, Mr. Chair, through your notation as you open an item. It's a public hearing, this is for recommendations, so on and so forth. But with that, I'll stand for any questions, or sit, I suppose, more technically.
Mr. Peterson. Yeah.
Where does the review period fit in? Is that 60 days prior to the hearing that the review period is open?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Peterson, the 60 days is really the full calendar days that an approval is open, meaning as that clock starts, it's called a shot clock, that clock starts the day that an application is submitted. So 60 days is from the date of application submittal. So you typically are seeing these perhaps 3, maybe sometimes 4 weeks since they were submitted. So we're already halfway into that 60-day period at times.
Okay, so technically the review period could have 40 days happen in the review period and then 20 working days from there after the publication of the newspaper ads.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The 20 working days is a part of the 60 days.
Okay.
Yeah, so the 20 working days is the notification process. So like I said, the 20 days are before you even see it, and that's part of the 60 days. So yes, there may be 40 days, perhaps generally less, that then you and the City Council in those cases for those application types have to review it and make the final decision.
So going backwards from the day of the hearing, which would be a Plan Commission hearing,
right,
the review period would have started 60 days before that, and the newspaper notices would have come at least 20 days before that.
The review period started with, so taking your example today, subtract 20 working days, minimum, is when the notification started. The application may have come in a week or 2 even before then.
Okay,
so we are, right now, the 60 days, we are in the middle of the 60 days, for example. So one thing we can do, again, I can point to, we don't typically include the applications in the staff reports, the application forms themselves, but it's, I can pull one up while we're speaking here, but if I can access those, but I can point out, for example, something was submitted the end of June, say June 28th. And now they have 60 days, so the end of August 28th, to have that reviewed by Plan Commission and Council, administrative review, what have you. So, here we are at, beginning of August, so we only have 3 weeks left, let's say, to review that. So that's the 60 days. So we are working within those 60 days right now.
Okay, so the 60 days is our review time or staff time as opposed to the public review time?
It's the full review time, inclusive of the public review.
So there can be no final determination made until after that 60-day review time?
No, that's the maximum that's allowed, is 60 days. So a decision needs to be made within 60 days of application submittal.
Okay.
Yeah, so, sorry for any confusion there, but yeah, that's, again, majority of those are 60 days. Some of those, for example, like, preliminary plat is 90 days, but again, for the most part, it's 60 days, again, some 90. But again, that's the final, that's what we call a shot clock. Time's up for everybody. Public review, Planning Commission, City Council, Zoning Board of Appeals, all Waterways and Parks Commission, anybody who has an opportunity to review it through a public review process, that's your full total days for everyone combined.
I was thinking of that as a minimum 60-day review as opposed to
It's a maximum, yes,
Okay.
thank you, to clarify exactly, that's a maximum. Under process, for example, 20 working days, that's a minimum. So yes, the 2 columns, one's a minimum, one's a maximum.
Thank you.
Yep.
Scott, what happens if we go past that time period? Like we delayed the vote on the satellite dish. I mean, if we'd have gone over 60 or 90 days, does that mean it's approved?
Typically, that's the case. Per state statute, it would be deemed approved. Is essentially how that operates. Again, an applicant can request or can agree to an extension that can expand beyond that time frame. So that's where it's not necessarily locked in stone. But again, it'd be something where the applicant would need to be agreeable to that.
Okay. Any additional questions on this? Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question, as far as occasionally during the public hearings, we've heard the residents express some frustration over maybe not knowing about the public hearings or hearing about it a couple of days before. And I recognize there's posting requirements, physical posting requirements, there's newspaper requirements, and I think we all agree we probably don't all read that section of the newspaper diligently. And if you happen to miss the stake that's in your yard, you may not see. Have we looked at other potential ways to communicate? And I recognize there's a responsibility on the neighborhood as well.
Mr. Chair
Please do.
and Commissioner Brennel, good question. It's an item that's come up at the City Council as well. They also made mention of that primarily through comments from the public, from neighbors and such. One that we are continuing to look at is where we post a sign and there'll be a flyer that's available in there. We've gotten some comments recently, and some of those are more actively engaged that they're missing, they run out. So we try to refill those as best we can, but it is really kind of a something that folks need to report to us. It's not something we would drive around, daily or even weekly to double check that. So that's why there's information in terms of phone number there as well. So hopefully that's sufficient. I know there are different communities provide different options for that. We've talked about that internally even several times. There are better ways, different ways to post a property, and such. But it's every one of those comes with its own downside. Where the last community I worked with did it a different way, but had problems just the same for different reasons. But anyway, that's something we're continually considering. Again, that's why I mentioned, I think it was a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the city increased its notification range to 300 feet, specifically because there was some additional interest from other folks in making sure that others were receiving that. One thing too, we're looking at, with that as well, there are a few cases where what happens when that 300 feet lands in the middle of a right of way? Should we extend that a little bit more, kind of fudge that a little bit and grab the property owners across the street? So there's some fudge factors to that staff utilizes, and not to give away all of our trade secrets, but the idea is we are trying to be as inclusive as possible. So 300 feet is a minimum, but we're trying to make sure we are using that in a logical manner. We're not just stopping at hard and fast 300.0 feet.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Great. Additional? Great.
And then the notification goes to property owners, because that is the documentation the city has in its record on the ownership, not the occupants of any particular parcel. Is there any kind of requirement on the property owner to inform tenants, or recommendation that they inform tenants? Or do other communities have any stipulations concerning the tenants of a property? Like I said, I don't expect the city to be able to track the tenant, but is there possibly leveraging the owners to contact tenants?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Granlund, very good question. It's not something that the city is required to do to notify tenants. It's certainly something we could look into. As I need to mention, apart from the 60 or 90 day maximum for the process here, everything else is really a minimum. So, the city can certainly look at doing something above and beyond what we currently do, just in terms of standard operating practices. But it's something we can look into, absolutely. So, thank you for mentioning that. I'll certainly look into that. Again, any other suggestions? Staff is certainly open to that. We'll certainly need to bring that back through City Attorney's Office, administration, and perhaps City Council as well, if we want to change anything more technically through codes and ordinances. But
I would just add, we do put a sign on the property, and then we also notify the neighborhood associations, Third Ward, Randall Park, good examples. We do notify them ahead of time that there is an application in for review, but we typically don't notify. I haven't seen a city, I've worked for 3 other cities, they typically don't notify the tenant of the building.
I worked for a city where they did. Not to counter Mr. Petrie's comments, Mr. Chair, but that was simply because there's an opportunity to review utility records. And again, every state, every community is different in terms of what access they have to things like utility records. So that makes a difference as well. That's why the caveat is always to see what city attorney's office can see what we can do with any of those, especially based on state statute. A lot of other avenues for notification. We do post the agenda on the city website. Again, that's not necessarily something that's required by statute or by code, but something we do as at least as a courtesy to the community. Again, a lot of opportunities that we can expand and enhance public notification. So if you have any certain specific recommendations or questions, certainly I'm making notes here, and we can certainly take those back and come back to you at a later date and see where we want to go with that.
Yes, Mr. Greger. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Allen, I had a question about whether we could, if the commission could maybe see maps of that 300-foot range that goes into play for these public notices, because sometimes it can really give us a good idea of distance for one, but also just like the folks that would be impacted, or the folks that may not have gotten the notice but maybe we feel would benefit from knowing a bit more. So when we got our packet on the Thursday before the meeting, we could kind of see how we could be able to anticipate who has gotten notice already. And I'm not sure if that's something that's been done in the past, but I think it could be something to look into starting to do.
Very good. Mr. Chair and Councilmember Rager, absolutely, it's certainly something we already produce. We can certainly include that in the staff report in the packet. No spoilers, but we are looking at making some enhancements to our staff reports. That may be precisely one of the items we'll be including, is that. So yes, it's something we already produce and something we can certainly include.
Great. Any other ideas, comments?
Thank you.
Next item, tiny homes. It's the next one on the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have this one as well. This will also lead into the final discussion item, which is, or final staff's discussion item, which is accessory dwelling units. Back at the June 18th meeting, Plan Commission requested a discussion of provisions for tiny homes within the city code. Just for some context there, again, tiny homes are typically defined as less than 400 square feet. And quote, small homes are defined as 400 to 1,000 square feet. But what's interesting is that under the present city code, both tiny home and small home are both allowed. City code allows any size home to be built as long as it's, again, meets minimum standards for your building code and such. So not necessarily have a 10 square foot home, let's say, but something certainly less than 400 square feet. However, the structure is required to be on a permanent foundation, meet all setbacks, be serviced by city water and sewer, and have a minimum of 2 off-street parking stalls per unit. So there's some still some basic minimums that are required as part of that. Plan Commission requested additional information on how a planned development (PD) process could apply to a tiny home development. One of the stated purposes of the PD provisions is to prevent flexibility in site design and variety in development. So obviously, a tiny home community could be something that could fall under a PD designation. Where underlying zoning district lot size and setback minimum requirements are limiting factors, the PD process can be desirable to those in the tiny homes market. So again, as such, lot size and setbacks can be requested to be reduced, as we've seen through other planned development projects. However, staff identified the fact that project density is still a limiting factor. So that seems to be really the restriction that's going to be an issue for those looking at a tiny home subdivision, for example. One example I gave in the memo was saying that going from a base R1 zoning to an R1P zoning can move from a maximum density of about 5.5 units per acre because you're utilizing the minimum 8,000 square foot lots, to 6.25 units per acre because that's on a per project density, so 5 units per acre of developable land. Plus, you get a 25% increase in overall project density. So although lot size minimums are all but removed, overall density remains limited to effective, doing the math, 15% density bonus, as you might want to call it, through a PD. So this can encourage, again, this density bonus can encourage cluster developments, pocket neighborhoods, cottage communities. These are all developments certainly with smaller house sizes, but probably not so much 400 square foot or less house sizes. So just wanted to let you know, staff did dig around into the PD ordinance. There's certainly opportunity there with reducing lot sizes and setbacks to allow some clustering of some smaller houses. But that density is, I think, going to be the real limiting factor. So not saying let's crack open the ordinance and remove density limitations, but especially for single family low density zoning districts, but something to think about. I'll say unintended consequences, but obviously there's a purpose for limiting higher density in a lower density zoning district and neighborhood. But if we do get any kind of interest in a tiny home type subdivision, and part of the research that was done was looking at other communities and other requirements and restrictions, and I found Bemidji, actually it's I think kind of through a regional planning group or planning commission up there, they have a tiny home subdivision ordinance. They actually call them tiny home subdivisions. And again, a little bit different situation there with more kind of vacation homes, kind of, cabin resorts and such around the lakes in that Bemidji area in northern Minnesota. But there are a lot of good examples out there of some good tiny home ordinances and such. But a lot of them still have the same kind of restrictions we already do in terms of the being built on a permanent foundation, having sewer and water, so on and so forth, parking requirements. So with that, I don't want to belabor the issue, but there's a lot out there we can talk about at length. They'll probably give a whole presentation at a conference on it, I suppose. But what I will propose as well is that American Planning Association, like we did with accessory dwelling units last time, I'll send you a link to kind of their information packet. It's a virtual information packet, but they have links to ordinances, news articles, blogs, a lot of good information that they've consolidated and put together to kind of talk about a certain topic. Planning Advisory Service is what's called PAS reports or PAS kind of informational packets. So I'll send a link out after the meeting, immediately here tonight. But this week here, pointing folks to that so you can kind of take a look at a little bit more of the minutia of the different standards that other communities have utilized that we could certainly take a look at. But in the truest sense, and this will lead a segue over to Ryan, with accessory dwelling units, is that tiny homes that we see on TV and we hear and read about more often is really looking at those that are in a mobile variety. They're not necessarily placed on a permanent foundation. That's more of what Ryan will be talking about, which are accessory dwelling units. Tiny homes that are on a permanent foundation, you can be a primary structure. Ryan will be talking kind of accessory structure concept. But tiny homes in its pure sense are really, mobile homes, RVs, that's really how they function and operate, especially from a zoning ordinance standpoint. So with that, if we are looking at that kind of tiny home, that would be a better fit in like an RV park setting, a mobile home park setting. We have standards for that in our zoning ordinance already. So again, I think through our current zoning ordinance, we have quite a few opportunities for tiny homes to come forward. So until I think we see a real strong surge of interest in a developer perhaps bringing forward a tiny home subdivision, I think we can route them through a process to get that at least before you for review. But I don't believe that our ordinance is really overly limiting in terms of folks really being able to propose something in a scale like that, kind of in a subdivision concept. A one-off wedged into an existing neighborhood, probably not an opportunity to do so. As a tiny home, as a true tiny home, it's mobile. But in a larger sense of a subdivision, I think there are opportunities for that. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, and before I turn to everybody else, is in our North Riverside neighborhood, they had a pocket neighborhood in the news. Sorry, have you heard anything on that, or is that the same idea?
Very good question. Yeah, pocket neighborhood in, I think, is it in the Cannery District, kind of right in that area?
Thanks.
No, good question. We reached out to them a couple weeks ago, those developers, and they are still doing a lot of their due diligence. Financing is always a hurdle for a lot of those kinds of projects, especially ones that are a little bit new and different. But from what they've been proposing, those homes are not in the tiny home variety. There may be some in that quote small home, under 1,000 square feet. But what they're looking at the most, that would be kind of a tiny home concept, would be kind of modular or manufactured homes. That may be something manufactured off-site that they bring on-site. It'd still be unique and perhaps custom built, but it'd just be off-site versus stick-built on-site. So that was the last we had heard from them. That was presented as well at a public forum about 2 months ago. But we did reach out just a couple weeks ago, and they are still working on it, still interested and still moving forward. But obviously a lot of the behind-the-scenes work is still underway.
So any questions for staff? Great.
You mentioned briefly that the off-street parking is two stalls per dwelling unit. Is that still the truth also in the plan development, or is there a variability allowed in the plan development?
Very good question, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Granlund. That is something I'm leaning at Mr. Petrie that could be requested to be reduced.
Yes, that could be requested to be reduced. However, we typically do not do that for a single family. The reason being is because typically you have 3 people that can drive, you have probably 3 cars. So if you reduce that down to, say, a single car garage, those 2 cars will probably be on the street, potentially, or in a driveway.
I hesitate to suggest there'd be 3 adults living together in a tiny house.
That's true too.
Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I guess one of my, I guess to that point about, the parking requirements, I mean, conceivably you could have just the parking spaces take up more space than the tiny home itself, conceivably. So I wonder if, one of the flexibilities that could exist that we could think about is if a home is under a certain amount of square feet, it could require fewer off-street parking, like spaces or something like that, just as a, because I think part of the intent of a tiny home is to reduce one's impact on the environment in the first place, or at least the amount of space that the person or persons are taking up on the property. So that could be a flexibility that we could look at, but obviously a lot of this relates to the accessory dwelling unit topic too, which I certainly appreciate all the background that you've given on this, and basically it's kind of good to hear that like it would be possible for someone to build a pretty small house and fit into some pretty reasonable standards that we already have in place. So I do want to thank you for the work you've done on this so far.
Agreed. Any other comments, questions? I'm not seeing any. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you.
Ryan, I guess accessory?
Sure. Moving on to accessory dwelling units, the Plan Commission held a discussion on June 18th. Staff has conducted more research. Actually found when we were moving from City Hall in 2013, the Plan Commission held a similar discussion. At that time, staff came up with 3 options and similar options as today. Option 1 was to leave the code unchanged. Option 2 was to allow accessory dwelling units with the conditional use. And then option 3 was to allow duplexes by conditional use in R1 district. I researched the minutes according to that. The Plan Commission liked option 1 and option 2. However, did discuss that enforcement of the proposed ordinance would be difficult. And in the end, they concluded that they'll leave the code the way it was. In addition, I did do some more research on Wisconsin cities similar to Eau Claire, and found that most of them, I actually had to call them, most of them don't even have accessory dwelling units in their ordinances. For example, La Crosse, Green Bay, Appleton, and Oshkosh are good examples of this. They completely removed it from their code. Similar to the discussion like I mentioned in 2013, staff has come up with 3 options for the commission to decide on moving forward. Option 1 would be to leave the code unchanged. Option 2 would be to allow them with a conditional use permit, which would come back to this commission. And then option 3 would be to remove the accessory dwelling unit from the zoning ordinance. We are looking for direction from the Plan Commission members and would be happy to answer any questions.
So if we said let's get rid of it, then you guys would initiate the process of a public hearing?
That is correct. So it still would have to go through this commission and the council to remove it from code.
So any change we talk about tonight would take additional steps and certainly public notices and so forth.
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah. On that, any questions, comments, discussion? Mr. Reynolds.
Looking at this, it would appear that if we went with option 1, which is to leave the code unchanged, would that require a public hearing? Or, I mean, basically we're saying it isn't broke, don't fix it, correct?
That is correct. We wouldn't have to do anything.
Okay, well, I applaud the wisdom of the 2013 Plan Commission, and just have, in my 2 cents is, we've got something here that, to some extent, it doesn't seem like it's causing us great angst. Do we want to create more angst by putting some more bells and whistles in this? My take would be no, but I'll also be ready to listen to my fellow commissioners. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Ms. Obeid?
Out of curiosity, under the current code, is there a minimum lot size and a maximum, accessory dwelling size allowed? I don't know what the current code says.
Not at this time. The current code is, under present city code, a detached dwelling unit is allowed for persons regularly employed on the premise and their immediate family. Also, city code does allow accessory dwelling units with the principal agriculture use. That is what we allow at this time.
Mr. Greger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I had I researched this a bit. There's obviously a lot more I can do, and I would love to have more resources, maybe from the American Planning Association, but I do think that I'm leaning toward the idea of trying to define a bit an accessory dwelling unit, so that and to ultimately look at allowing them, because I guess principally to be a part of that discussion of affordable housing in Eau Claire and options for people that are, particularly people that are maybe single and just out of college. Maybe they moved here for a job, or they just graduated from the Tech College or UW Eau Claire, and they're looking for that next step, kind of out of trying to maybe move out of a situation where they have a lot of roommates or something. I guess I can sort of identify in a way with a lot of people that are in that situation, but maybe affordability is the big problem. And then also I think there's the affordability issue of, there's a lot of houses in Eau Claire that are maybe have some extra space. I think the household size has decreased dramatically since a lot of the houses in Eau Claire were built. So maybe there could be some flexibilities to allow accessory dwelling units in order to actually increase affordability for people who already own homes or already have a piece of property that maybe has some flexibility. So I guess part of it is also just the issue of, we're building a lot of houses still on the outskirts of town, and maybe there are some opportunities for infill that we can have more people in particular neighborhoods, or at least in particular situations where it might work out. So I'm kind of open-minded to this. I guess what I'm saying, because I'm seeing some benefits that are out there. So I guess I wanted to hear what other commissioners think about the potential benefits as well.
Mr. Peterson?
For definition of accessory dwelling unit, they don't necessarily need to be a separate structure. They can be like a kitchenette and a bathroom and a bedroom in a existing dwelling.
In R1 zoning or R2 zoning?
I'll ask you that question.
It would have to be R2 zoning, because now R1 zoning is strictly single family. Typically, they do not have, well.
How about if it's the mother of one of the adults in the house?
Under the same structure or a detached? Well, it's that's hard to track. That's hard to enforce. I know some finish off a basement and they do like a wet bar, or they do a refrigerator with a sink. Is that accessory dwelling? I mean, you still need to go upstairs to use a stove and do laundry and things like along those lines. But in an R2 district, you could almost have another structure, living structure on site, as long as you meet the duplex requirements. I can't think of any new houses that were built last year, but in the R2 district that would work, but the R1 zoning district that would not work. I would defer to if Mr. Allen has any comments on that as well.
No, good question. I believe as well our current, trying to find the specific code reference, but ADUs here are referring to detached units, so typically that's what we're seeing here, detached accessory dwelling units. But yes, there are certain types of ADUs that could really be attached as an addition. They can be included as a upper level, like Ryan was saying, almost like a duplex is operating. There is a fine line, and we'd have to review that at staff level to see if that would qualify as a duplex that has separate kitchen facilities, so on and so forth. Especially it's that attached version of an ADU, but detached is really what our code is referring to. So as Councilmember Greger mentioned though as well, that there's certainly an opportunity to expand or at least research additional options for the ADUs, or as Commissioner Reynolds said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. A route where not sure if there's really been a strong clamoring for this, but as it's currently defined, it is pretty limited as detached and as for immediate family or as somebody who's employed on your premise, which I think we were assuming was, I guess, I don't know, Mr. Chair, you're a butler that you have, living in your house or something like that. So, right, exactly, farmhand, right. But that was really what the intention was with the original code, which speaks to a little bit how perhaps it might be a bit outdated. So that's why staff also wanted to mention this additionally, that even though no changes were recommended in 2013, perhaps there's an opportunity to look at some modifications to at least some of the terminology. But in so doing, then we start talking about attached versus detached, we start talking about family versus non-family, and then it can snowball pretty quickly. So,
and from our last discussion, I remember that there was two good examples, at least it stuck with me. One was my old neighbor on Jefferson down in the 3rd Ward, literally built out a mother and father-in-law suite upstairs. Those folks passed away, and then they started renting it out. And then now you got, 2 people living, or 2 rentals in that building, or maybe 3 now at this point. But that one kind of snuck in under the mother-in-law suite, now as an apartment. And then I think it was Disa, who was here earlier, actually went into an R2 and built out a mother-in-law suite in her property, but she went and found an R2 building. But as far as any anxiety, I mean, is it kind of that abusing example that maybe has got us talking, where folks are going to the 3rd Ward and converting single families into apartments and getting rid of stuff in the neighborhood?
I think that's part of it, Mr. Chair, is the fact is, again, Mr. Petrie can speak to this through his research that he had done. It seemed pretty much consistent that all the other communities that have, college housing, student housing, issues and items that they're wrestling with do not allow ADUs. Again, that's I say simplistic, but it's certainly the easiest way to deal with it by just not allowing it when you flat out prohibit something. But certainly a number of other communities have been able to finesse and fine tune ADU standards and still operate it with student housing. Madison is one of those. In Minnesota, Minneapolis is one of those. So there are certainly other communities that have been able to balance and play the balancing act with student housing and with accessory dwelling units. So as it stands right now, as Councilmember Greger mentioned, there's a lot of affordable housing. There's a regional housing task force that's underway as well. So there's certainly it's certainly one ingredient to that discussion, but it's still just one ingredient to that discussion. Same with the tiny homes, but we're certainly open to researching it further, providing with sample ordinance language if that's something you'd like to take a look at. But again, it's one of those things where are we not getting the questions and people clamoring for this because there isn't a need, or is it because they already have identified the fact that we don't allow it in that expansive way. It is allowed, but not in that I want to rent this out to my, neighbor's, college student in a couple of years after, the in-laws no longer live there.
Sure, Will.
Thank you. I was a part of the 2013 discussion. And, a lot of things that have been mentioned were the concerns that we shared at that time. The enforcement, obviously, the resale, the no longer needing that property as an accessory dwelling, and then what does it become? But we also felt too that there was ample amounts of R2 zoning already in place, and the opportunity to have that accessory dwelling or multi-use zoning where, we're not shutting it off to the entire city, we're shutting it off to R1. And I think at that time we just felt that it made sense to leave it as it was. Those that really wanted to make it work, like Disa, who was here earlier, she found an area where she could get into R2 zoning, and she built a beautiful home, and in addition to it, attached a home for her mom. And it worked out well. So I think that was our intent back then, and still my intent now. I think I would opt for the first choice and leaving it as is, and I guess we can see as things progress. But I think the other communities, I think that's a loud statement as well, the fact that no one else has taken that on yet. I know that it's been approved. I know Buffalo County has approved it. Some of the rural areas are out there approving it. But again, that's a different setting, a different scenario, and not the same enforcement concerns that we have in R1 and in the city.
Great. Mr. Peterson, do you have?
I'd like to, for the Plan Commission and the city to be ready if this really comes to the forefront with the example that Mr. Well just gave, when the mother passes away and that dwelling unit or attached dwelling unit is now vacant. She's in an R2, does she have the right to rent that out then to a non-family member?
Legally, yes.
Legally she does, okay. But if it was zoned R1, they would not. So if I were to take in an ailing mother, in that we're empty nesters, and my mother passes away, I could not rent that out to a college student then or a working person.
See, I think that's where the enforcement issue comes into
How are
play.
you gonna know about it unless the neighbors ran on you?
That is correct. That's where the enforcement becomes a big problem.
But I don't know if this is, it sounds like there hasn't been a push for it, but I think we have to be ready if it does come, and I think this initial conversation is not bad at all. I'd like to stay with the option one and leaving it where it is, but just to keep it in the back of our minds that if we get 2 or 3 requests for this, we've got to be ready to react, and at least we've had some initial discussions both in 2013 and today. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I would reflect, or my opinion is similar to Mr. Weld's. I think there's potential for abuse with that accessory dwelling unit idea. I think also we have to keep in mind that in R2 zoning, I believe you have to have 10,000 square feet or more in order to do this. And I think a lot of the lots, and maybe Ryan can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the city center are actually under 10,000 square feet. So I think I kind of like the protection that we have right now, and I guess I'd like to see that stay in place. Perhaps in 3 or 4 years, we can talk about it again.
Mr. Seymour, you are correct. R2 is 10,000 square foot minimum. If you're in the RM district, which is mixed residential, you're at 8,000. And then it goes down to R3 and R4 is at 6,000 square feet minimum lot size, and there is no variance process for reducing that lot size down. Now you can do a planned development to allow for less, but we have not seen any at this time. So you are correct on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Prager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess one of the things that I would appreciate keeping this in front of staff in terms of like keeping the research current, because I think there is a lot happening. So I'm glad that the Plan Commission reviewed this in 2013 and that we're doing it again, and I expect that'll happen again too, because I think it is a movement that's occurring in different communities, and we're seeing it in rural areas as well as in urban areas, and maybe medium-sized cities haven't really caught up with it yet. But I guess part of that research and open-mindedness, I guess you could say, would be to look at it from the perspective of not just the separated structures from the main home, but as ways to modify an existing home, like like a basement or maybe a space above a garage, or maybe an addition to a house. So making sure that we, because I think that's ultimately where the affordability piece comes in, is when you're actually making modifications to an existing structure versus building something new, because I think that's obviously more expensive, and my concern is mostly how we can make sure we're keeping options open for people to live in our city affordably. So just an extra comment there.
Wonderful. Any additional comments? Mr. Grant?
I think that our tendency to think about it as the dwelling portion of the equation keeps us from thinking about the fact that, once again, like my previous statement, it comes sometimes down to the parking requirements, and that people who are looking to build an extra apartment but not add more parking at the same time are looking for something in the terms of variance, just because they're looking to do something different than what is in fact allowed. If you took any one of the residences around that had more than enough space for the family in it and determined it would be nice to have 2 dwelling units, you'd require 2 additional parking stalls because it's 2 actual residences. And I think we kind of overlooked that, like, oh, we'll just change this. But the fact is, you need the full accompaniment of all the required parts, or you have to ask for an exemption. And if you're asking for an exemption, you are already got processes involved which would allow a temporary exemption or a permanent exemption, or whichever category it needs to go into.
Great. Any other comments, discussion? So I don't know if we've got a consensus of any kind here. I don't. You want to?
But I might tell you, Mr. Chair, we're at option 1 still at this point, but I think I've made quite a few notes here, and appreciate especially a comment about keeping things in front of staff and perhaps revisiting it as things arise, and we need to be nimble in our responsiveness to needs and changing housing environment. So something staff will certainly take under advisement. Obviously, City Council may have some additional comments that they'd like to weigh in on as other things progress, the discussion about affordable housing. Again, there's this regional task force that's underway, housing task force. So again, this is one item that's still going to be discussed, even if it's not a code-specific change that's being recommended or directed here tonight.
Okay, sounds great. No objections to that, so.
Okay.
Next, code compliance items. Anybody, code compliance? Future agenda items? All right, okay, minutes. Any additions or corrections to the minutes? Mr. Peterson.
One clarification, under number 5, with the
Pablo Center signing. I know I had brought up that 57 square foot electronic message center proposed along the east wall along Graham Avenue to make sure that has, if there's any projections out into the sidewalk area, that they are soft projections as opposed to something a person could harm themselves on. I don't know how that gets.
And that was part of the friendly amendment? Or just discussion?
I don't know if it was amended in the motion or not.
Just a discussion?
I think you mentioned it, but I don't know if you did an actual official amendment to the recommendation from staff. You mentioned it, but I don't think it officially got into the recommendation.
All right.
If I remember right though, I think Mr. Granlund pointed out that the architectural design requirements do cover that concern.
Okay. And then, under conditional use, number 6, conditional use permit for the ground mount satellite dish. Yeah, that one, at the end it says Mr. Larson moved carried, and I'm just wondering what that is saying.
That's supposed to say motion.
Not Mr. Larson seconded and the motion of us postponed. That's the one we discussed tonight. We postponed it to this meeting and it says Mr. Larson moved carried. And I think Mr. Larson seconded and the motion carried for postponed.
That's correct.
So if that English could be clarified. That's all I have.
All right. Great. I guess that makes us adjourned.
Very good.
Mr. Allen, here.
Oh, only that many thanks to Mr. Jeff Kippinger and his staff, Community Services at Parks and Rec. Division there with the orange sports water bottles before you. We're promoting a leave no trace approach with our use of the county boardroom. Many thanks to Eau Claire County board as well as staff to allow us to be here and host these meetings for the next year or so. But in that vein, want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to have a reusable water bottle, because you'll be requested to bring your own water as we go along, as Commissioner Brentholt is demonstrating. There is a sink in the back of the room.
I apologize for the coffee today.
That's exactly it. I apologize that we were not able to provide those filled water bottles, but there is a sink in the back of the room if you'd like to utilize that to refill as you go along. But please be sure to bring your own water for each of these meetings, so we provide a water bottle to do just that. I should also note, as Chair, we've been discussing as well, the first meeting in September, so not next meeting, but the following meeting is on a Tuesday. It's the day after Labor Day. So it's again the first Monday of September is Labor Day. That'll be Tuesday, September 4th. That also conflicts with Eau Claire County's Plan Commission. So they meet in this room, and so we have a conflict there. Obviously, they win every time. That being the case, we are currently working on finalizing location for you, and we'll notify you of that once we do. So it'll be something similar to this or to the City Council chambers. It won't be too unusual, I hope. But other than that, please enjoy a cookie on the way out. Commissioner Brentholt is guarding those for me. I appreciate that. Enjoy a cookie on the way out. Again, didn't want to leave too much of a mess, and didn't want to one-up Mr. Peterson with his birthday treat last meeting, but those are my birthday treats for you for tonight. So enjoy that on the way out. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Happy birthday and meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689, or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.